Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, a West Virginia man is reviving a historic black coal camp through farming.
As you can tell, the chickens are probably some of the healthiest that you're going to find, and this is the quality that you can get here in Appalachia when you're doing it the right way.
The legacy of Affrilachian poet Norman Jordan includes a summer camp for teens to study their heritage.
Learning about black history and stuff like that did amazing things. It made me realize how great our culture is.
And the Reverend George Mills Dickerson of Tazewell, Virginia, was born in the years after slavery ended. He's remembered on Juneteenth through his poetry.
I think he was really way ahead of his time. He was not letting somebody else name us. He is naming himself.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia.
Support for this program is brought to you by Solar Holler, helping West Virginia homeowners manage their energy costs through solar power. Details at solarholler.com.
Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. In the early 20th century, the coal industry was booming in Appalachia. That made the region a destination for black migrants from the Deep South, who were moving northward in search of new jobs. Black communities thrived in Appalachia through the boom. But as coal employment declined, black coal camps began to dwindle. Now a West Virginia man is reviving one of those coal camps through farming. Tierra Brown reports.
It's a cold day on a farm in McDowell County, West Virginia. Farmer Jason Tart is showing me around.
So they had what we call smokehouses. Most yards had a smokehouse in it. I could show you behind here.
The land Jason is describing was once a black coal camp known as Berwyn, Hartwell, or simply the camp. At its peak, Berwyn was a thriving, tight-knit community.
People from all over the United States, black people I'm talking about, came here. We had all black schools. The trade schools were black.
That's Nathaniel Tart, Jason's father. He grew up in Berwyn during the 1940s.
So when integration happened, a wave of unemployment swept across not only the West Virginia, but this country for black people. And that's when it all started.
McDowell County was once the beating heart of America's coal industry, but in 1960, the area began to decline. In 1950, 100,000 people called the county home. Today, fewer than 20,000 residents remain. Crushing poverty and an ongoing opioid crisis have defined the region for a generation. Yet this land still whispers with potential, and a story of renewal is being written by black folks whose ancestors called the Berwyn coal camp home. Jason Tart has transformed the coal camp into a 300-acre demonstration farm and economic development hub.
Our approach to economic development and really building out the ag sector is circulating that money within our own community.
For years, the land around the Berwyn coal camp lay fallow. Today, chickens roam freely, orchards bloom, and maple syrup flows. Tart's business, T&T Organics, provides a fresh variety of produce, goat meat, and eggs.
So we've got peaches, we've got pears, plums, apples, we've got cherry trees here.
I see some chicken, too.
Yes, so we have what we call mountain-ranged poultry. As you can tell, the chickens are probably some of the healthiest that you're going to find. We do not do any artificial stuff. They're all natural. And this is the quality that you can get here in Appalachia when you're doing it the right way.
Jason Tart's business also works together with EDGE, a nonprofit he founded which stands for Economic Development Greater East. Together, they operate a demonstration and research training environment, aptly named DIRT.
EDGE's focus is economic development in the coal fields. You know, what are we beyond coal mining, right? And we've been a single sector economy for so long, no one in the positions of leadership in the state of West Virginia took the time to figure out what are we going to do after the coal mining industry declines.
50 people have completed EDGE training sessions since 2020, and many are in the process of starting their own local agricultural businesses. Jason is also working to restore some of the remaining structures from the original coal camp.
The church is kind of the last of what's left here. Some of it's fallen in. We definitely want to try to restore it and at least have some memory of what once was here, because now there's no way to tell what this was.
For some, remembering Appalachia's Black history feels more important now than ever. Dr. William Turner was born and raised in the nearby coal fields of eastern Kentucky. He's the author of The Harlan Renaissance, Stories of Black Life in Appalachian Coal Towns. He grew up in a community very much like the Berwyn coal camp.
So I grew up in a town where the Black community was what you might really call a genuine community, of people whose values, whose attitudes, whose traditions, whose heritage, whose little sayings and jokes and all of that, and particularly the notion of the primacy of the family was so important. So I grew up in what you call one of those now extinct, tight Black communities.
But just because something is extinct doesn't mean it can't be revived. By using the land to create new opportunities for the people of McDowell County, Jason Tart hopes to create a community more like the ones his parents and grandparents remember. In McDowell County, I'm Tiara Brown.
That story was reported with support from Black by God, the West Virginian. The word Affrilachian was coined by Kentucky poet Frank X. Walker in 1991. That's when he co-founded the Affrilachian Poets Collective, to challenge the idea that Appalachian identity is defined by whiteness. Walker says the word Affrilachian, quote, spoke to the union of Appalachian identity and the region's African American culture and history. He's published several collections of poetry. Last fall, I spoke with Walker about his latest, Load In 9 Times. Frank X. Walker, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia.
Honored to be here.
I'm wondering if you could start with reading one of your poems.
I'll start with one in the voice of Margaret Garner, who's made into an institution by the work of Toni Morrison, particularly in her book and movie Beloved. Margaret Garner's character shows up as a escaped enslaved woman who kills her 2-year-old child rather than have her returned back into enslavement after she's caught and captured in Ohio after escaping with her entire family. This is a poem in the voice of Margaret, who was tried over 3 weeks in Cincinnati and was not allowed to testify. So this poem tries to imagine what she might have to say. Testify, Margaret Garner. Maplewood Plantation, Covington, Kentucky. Look at me and my swollen belly. Look at my pale, pale skin. Look at this scar across my face. Don't call me murderer. My slave name is next. Look at my children. You think they look like Master Gaines too? Step back from all this. Stop eyeballing me and the sharp, sharp blade. Take a closer look at the white man. The older Gaines, who is also my daddy, sold me to his brother, which means my uncle has kept me barefoot and with child since I was barely 15. I got 3 more at my waist, 1 on my hip, and 1 more in my belly right now. But don't count the children. Look at the scars on my face. These ain't from my husband's hand. I spared my baby girl not from this life, but from my life. You saw how much she looked like me. Half the lawyers think this whole trial be not about murder, but if we be people or property. But it'd take another woman like Miss Lucy to understand that it really be about something else, something much worse than taking a life or acknowledging one, about making a woman's body your smokehouse and root cellar, about believing her sore, sore plum is your fresh fruit. That's all I got to say.
Whew, man, yeah, that's That's that.
They hit
Wow.
hard.
Yeah. How did you first conceptualize this book? What planted the idea in your head?
Well, it came about organically. I had been hired to write some short biographies of Civil War soldiers for this new project in Kentucky called Reckoning Inc. And they wanted to take all these archival documents that were newly available and were being digitized, and alongside the invitation to do your own research, they would show examples of bios written by Kentucky writers. And then I realized that this information that I was finding in these documents was so interesting that I was more moved to respond with a poem than a traditional bio. So I asked permission to also include poems with the bios, and they were very excited about that. And then after about a half dozen, anonymous soldiers with no connection to me, I recalled that I had relatives, but I didn't have very much information. And I asked them if they would consider my own relatives with their research. And a week later, they came back with a 99-page document of pension files and affidavits and records connected to Randall and Mary Edlin, which were my third great grandparents. And that changed my whole trajectory. And I just wanted to write about them. I wanted to know more about them. So I abandoned the project that I already started and just focused on researching the Civil War and writing poems in response to what I was finding out about how it impacted Black families whose men and women were connected to Camp Nelson, which had a refugee camp in what is now known as Nicholasville, Kentucky. I'd passed by this place for decades and only visited maybe once or twice, but didn't know how much of my own family story was present there. Both Randall Edlin and Henry Clay Walker, another third great grandfather, had been stationed there at the same time. Just knowing that I had family members who had been at Camp Nelson made me really interested in going back and revisiting. And this book has kind of grown up around that idea of trying to capture that story that's not singularly about the Civil War, but is about the challenges Black families faced before, during, and immediately after the war. And it tells a different story than the story that the textbooks have put forth.
Yeah, so Marion Randall Edlin and Elvira and Henry Clay Walker are family members to whom you dedicate the book, and they also appear in the book at times. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you learned about them in the course of researching and writing this?
Well, one of the things that I think that first made an impact for me when considering that question is that my name is Frank X. Walker, and the X in my name is not my birth name. Is that became my nickname in college and then became my legal name when I became a practicing artist and writer in the world. I wanted to be known as Frank X. Walker because the X stood for the unknown in the tradition of Malcolm X, and that unknown meant I don't know my original African name, and that's where I traced my lineage to. And that unknown also had to do with the period of enslavement when census records did not include the names of individuals who were enslaved, just their age, occupation, and maybe their color. So the X represent all that history. And when I'm pouring through these files, I kept coming across Mary Edlin's name. And I noticed one day that her handwriting kept being a little bit different each time. And so I took the chance to zoom in on one of her signatures and realized that in between her name, in between Mary and Edlin, it just said her mark, and there was an X. And a bell went off. And so I pulled back from that image and realized that that document, there were two signatures to the left of that vouched for her signature, which, it took about two more steps in my head to realize that she was illiterate. And so somebody else wrote her name and she had to put an X in the spot. And then that spot had to be identified as her mark. So she was Mary X. Edlin, And I was Frank X. Walker, and I thought I'd been the first X in the family, but here was this woman, for almost the same reason, reaching across time to her, third grade great grandson to communicate something. And to me, that was a really powerful moment.
This is a poetry collection, but it really feels not so much as a collection of poems as sort of this widescreen experience of probably the pivotal moment in American history, immediately before the Civil War, during, and then picking up the pieces after. And we see this moment through all these kind of different perspectives. Enslaved people, their former masters, and some historic figures as well. How were you able to squeeze your brain into all these different perspectives to tell this shared story?
What I learned, having written 5 previous collections of historical poetry, is that the more points of view that are present, the closer to the truth the entire narrative feels. This was a chance to talk about something that everybody knows about. There are literally thousands of books about the Civil War, but I was trying to come at it from a point of view that challenged traditional narratives. In Kentucky, Kentucky's neutrality and then joining the Union, almost presented a romanticized notion of what the Civil War was in Kentucky. But almost none of those historical accounts share a point of view that's from the Black families, the soldiers and their family members, as far as the Civil War was concerned. So I wanted to approach it from that direction. And I knew that I'd have to have, villains and heroes. I wanted to make sure women's voices were present and that children were also included. And if I was going to discuss enslavement, I need to have the individuals who oppress the other people and their victims in the same space.
We're going to take a short break. Coming up, we continue our conversation with Kentucky poet Frank X. Walker. You're inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, offering 31 bachelor-level degrees and 6 master-level degrees for students of any age. More information at concord.edu.
Welcome back. We're continuing my conversation with Frank X. Walker, co-founder of the Affrilachian Poets and author of the new book, Load In 9 Times. Let's hear another poem from this collection.
Sure, I'll read one of the ones that hit hard. It's also hard to read and maybe hard to listen to because it requires me to pretend to sing part of this song. But it challenges the kind of romanticized notions of the nostalgia that people want to think My Old Kentucky Home, the song, is really about. But if you listen to the lyrics, if you especially listen to the original lyrics, you know the history of Stephen Foster. You know that this song was written as a minstrel song. You know the history of minstrelsy and what that represented in the United States. You understand that there are a lot of layers to the song. So I'm going to read Why I Don't Stand. And it's a poem that actually pulls from 2 sources, the original lyrics to My Old Kentucky Home and from an advertisement from the same year the song was written in that ran in the Lexington paper, advertising the desire to purchase Negroes. So Why I Don't Stand. Oh, the sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home. $1,200 to $1,250 for Negroes. 'Tis summer, the darkies are gay. The undersigned wishing to purchase a large lot of Negroes. Well, corn tops ripe for the New Orleans market and the meadows in the bloom. I will pay $1,200 to $1,250 for number 1 young men and $850 to $1,000 for number 1 young women. While the birds make music all the day. In fact, I will pay more for likely Negroes. Weep, no more, my lady. Oh, weep no more today than any other traitor in Kentucky. We sing one song. My office is adjoining the Broadway Hotel for my old Kentucky home. On Broadway, Lexington, Kentucky, for my old Kentucky home far away, where I or my agent can always be found.
Man,
It hits.
it does hit. So that poem is an example of the first section, which really bracingly drops us into pre-Civil War slavery. And then the book progresses. Can you describe how it's kind of constructed into three parts and how it flows and why you chose that construction?
I wanted to make sure I told a full account of the Civil War through these soldiers' eyes, which meant I had to really unfold how they all came to be soldiers and what the motivation may have been. And the biggest motivation was when they changed the law and not just allowed soldiers in Kentucky to join up, but guaranteed that once they signed their names, their children and their wives and their mothers also became free. But I also wanted to make sure that, the soldiers had a chance to tell their story. So the middle part of the book is mostly in the voices of soldiers who participated. And then once the war was concluded, and I think a story that's undertold is how much effort Kentucky as an institutional space, using legal means, tried to reinstate some of the benefits of having enslaved free labor available. There was a whole period of almost 10 years where there was this effort to put newly free people back in their place, and a whole period of domestic terrorism that was rendered upon free Black people by former Confederate officers. Because if there were 25,000 African American men who, joined the Union Army, there was also as many Kentucky white men who joined the Confederate Army and then returned to Kentucky after the war. And for 10 years, groups of them, sometimes up to 200 former cavalrymen on horseback, rode around central Kentucky, terrorizing newly freed Black men and their families and chased them off their new farms that they were able to purchase with their $300 that was earned money from having been soldiers.
I'm curious, and you're working on this book, what did you learn about the Civil War in Kentucky that most surprised you?
Well, I think, this may sound overstated, but I think I'm surprised, but I shouldn't have been. A lot of people think the Civil War is not over. And there's evidence of those same battles for the same reasons are being fought every day, especially along lines of race and class and, the landed, wealthy, moneyed corporation entities versus the people who have been dispossessed. Efforts to divide and conquer, divide peoples, particularly poor people, working class people from each other, and make them believe the enemy is that other person. And I guess the energy we need to work on if we want to land in a better place is, how do we push against that division and figure out a way to support and push towards ending that and working towards a common goal. I hope that people read these poems and realize that they're based on real human beings and get caught up and connected to the emotional stuff that's infused in the poem and experience it like watching a movie, that they leave this book saying, I felt something. And I will now think about this period in history differently. And I will look for the lessons that I think are very self-evident in this retelling.
Well, Frank X. Walker, it's been an honor. Thank you for speaking with us at Inside Appalachia.
Thank you, Mason. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Frank X. Walker's Load In 9 Times is available from Norton. Affrilachian poet and playwright Norman Jordan was a prominent voice in the Black arts movement through the 1960s and 1970s. He was also one of the most published poets in the region, anthologized in at least 42 books. He died in 2015 at the age of 77. Along with his writing, Jordan left another legacy. A summer camp for teens to learn music, theater, and dance. Last summer, Folkways reporter Tracy Phillips visited the Norman Jordan African American Arts and Heritage Academy in Westover, West Virginia. Tracy brought us this story.
It's a Monday morning in July on the campus of West Virginia State University. But it's not an average Monday morning. It's day one of summer camp.
Y'all ready for this week? Word. Me too.
There's a buzz of excitement in the air. Returning campers exchange hugs and hellos. New students make nervous introductions, and orientation commences.
Welcome to the 30th Norman Jordan African American Arts and Heritage Academy. We've been doing this for 30 years.
That's Brucilla Jordan, the wife of the late Norman Jordan. Norman was a poet and prominent leader in the Black arts movement, both in West Virginia and nationwide. In 1994, he and a group of artists started this academy. When Norman passed away in 2015, Brucilla took on the role as camp director.
We have a wonderful week of activities planned for you all.
During the week-long program, campers focus on a specific artistic genre, like dance, creative writing, or theater. But it isn't just an arts camp. It's about heritage and identity.
We always start our program with a libation ceremony. And a libation ceremony is an ancient African ceremony.
Students look on, attentive and wide-eyed, as Brucilla performs the libation ceremony, pouring water into a glass jar in memory of the ancestors. She tells them to say something they are thankful for. Then everyone else will say Ashe, which means let it be.
I'm going to begin by mentioning my mother. Her name is Sarah Wiggins. Ashe.
I would like to mention my grandmother, Margaret Birch.
Ashe.
The orientation and libation ceremony kicks off a full week of classes and activities. This year, there are about 30 students, many of whom are returning campers, like Soraya Nichols. She's a freshman in high school who's been coming to the camp for 3 years now.
At first, I was really anxious to see if all my other friends were back and stuff like that. But now I'm just really excited and happy to see everybody.
Soraya's focus this week is on singing.
Miss Ely, our singing coach, she comes up with really amazing songs and makes them sound really good with all our voices together.
Like the song To Be Young, Gifted, and Black by Nina Simone, which is the inspiration for this year's theme.
You know anything about Nina Simone? What do you know about Nina Simone? Find out. That's your homework for tomorrow. Find out something about Nina Simone. Just one fact. Just one fact. Everybody a different fact.
Learning about prominent Black artists is a key aspect to the camp's curriculum.
Learning about these Black people and Black history and stuff like that did amazing things. It made me realize how great our culture is, and it made me feel so much prouder to be Black.
Brucilla says that's one of the main goals of camp, to foster a sense of cultural identity and self-expression.
You know, we do the camp on a teenage level because we know teenagers often they have not discovered their own talents. I believe when they identify that aspect of themselves and also the African American cultural heritage, it always gives them greater self-identity and interact, I think, in the world better.
Brucilla has witnessed that process of self-discovery firsthand.
My children attended the camp as campers, and they are all artistic. They are songwriters, musicians, organizers.
Brucilla's sons are now instructors at the camp, carrying on their father's legacy. And over the years, other families have become involved with the camp too. It's common for parents and grandparents to help out in different ways. In fact, Soraya's own father is here this week. He's a guest instructor for poetry.
We have a special guest with us today, Jimmy the Poet from the west side of Charleston, so please give him a warm welcome.
Soraya's dad, James Nichols, goes by Jimmy the Poet. Although Jimmy didn't know the Jordans before this camp, he's been inspired by Norman Jordan and his legacy.
I just think that his vision is becoming more full circle, not just for his family, his kids, but just for people like my kids and myself. So I'm very honored to be at something like this.
Today, Jimmy is leading campers through a writing exercise that he calls the forgiveness practice.
Poetry has always been an outlet for me. Freestyling has always been an outlet for me. And I thank God that I have it. So as we go through the forgiveness practice, I want you to really think about the things that you've gone through. And I want you to come up here and give me a victory speech.
The students write about a difficult situation they've had to overcome. And at the end of the class, they have the option to share their victory speech.
I get that we're poor, but can't you see so much more? I'm rich with ideas underneath my shell, but trust that I love you and I forgive you, and I'll still reach my potential as well.
Let's go.
Jimmy is passionate about sharing this experience with his daughter, Soraya.
It was important for her to come to this academy because I understand how important the arts are. I understand how important the freedom of expression is, the First Amendment is. Now that I think about it, her being in that workshop, if there's anything that I want her to understand, it would be two things. There's power in the gifting, and there's power in vulnerability.
Soraya says after 3 years of coming to camp, she's seen the impact camp has made on her life.
It's shown me a lot more social skills, helped me make new friends and family, and it's expanded my vocals, and it's changed my life.
After a full week of classes and rehearsing, it's time for the closing ceremony. Campers present slideshows of their drawings and paintings. There's theater, dance, instrumental music, and Soraya is performing with her vocal group. For the final send-off, the entire group joins together on stage where they stand hand in hand.
In closing, now let the circle all say, Harambe to all our people.
Harambe to all our people.
Hands go up. Know that we are all winners. Say that.
Know that we are all winners.
Safe travels, everybody.
For this year, camp is over, but Soraya and other students are already planning to come back next year. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Tracy Phillips in Institute, West Virginia.
Beyond gifted and black is where it's at, is where it's at, is where it's at.
Poetry is a tradition in Jeanette Wilson's family. They've recited the poems of Wilson's grandfather and her Uncle George for nearly 100 years. Now, these poems about African American life in southwestern Virginia are read during the Juneteenth celebration in Tazewell, Virginia, where they reach a wider audience and connect the past to the present. In 2023, Folkways reporter Connie Kitts brought us the story.
Jeanette Wilson thinks she was about 5 years old when she heard one of her grandfather's poems for the first time. Her Aunt Edna used to recite them to the children.
She would we'd be just up and cuddled in her bed, like story time or whatever.
Some of her grandfather's poems were matched with tunes to make them easier to memorize, like the Virginia Hills.
And it went, Virginia hills, Virginia fields, and the days of long ago. Oh, I wonder, I remember the folks I used to know.
Her grandfather was Reverend George Mills Dickerson. She called him Papa. He was born in 1871. He became an ordained minister, preached for more than 50 years, and married more than 1,000 couples at the Tazewell County Courthouse. He also taught in the segregated black schools, and he wrote poems, hundreds of them. He wrote about black children making the long trek to a school in Tip Top, about soldiers coming home from World War I with shell shock. There were family poems, Tazewell poems, and love poems, with themes of his Christian faith woven throughout. Jeanette's grandfather collected 106 of his poems and had them bound and published in 1949.
I'm so thankful that I got these books published because they would have been lost. And it's our history.
And he didn't have to just pass it down orally, because this man could write. He could definitely write.
Joseph Bundy is a poet, playwright, and community historian based in Roanoke. He says Dickerson's poems were a commentary on Black life in Southwest Virginia in the first half of the 20th century, and they reveal his aspirations for his people.
In the fields of old Virginia and on Georgia's sunny plain, Africa's able sons. So he's going to say African reference, Black, African, Africa's able sons and daughters sing a hopeful, glad refrain.
These lines are from the poem Black Folks Coming.
Instead of saying Negroes coming or colored folks coming, he's saying black folk coming. I think he was really way ahead of his time. He was not letting somebody else name us. He is naming himself.
Reverend George Dickerson died in 1953, but the tradition of writing poetry carried on with his son, George Murray Dickerson, Jeanette's uncle.
Now, the Tazewell, Virginia Rescue Squad proudly presents George Dickerson.
His poems were humorous, but also topical.
We've got a president today. His name is Richard Nixon. From what I hear and read about, this country needs some fixing.
Uncle George recited his poems at high schools, community colleges, at local museums and festivals. He recorded them and printed them up.
He would be selling his little booklets and setting up his little tent and reciting poems at the Main Street Moments.
Jeanette says her grandfather and her uncle's poetry spanned momentous points in African American history.
Papa was right out of slavery, and Uncle George, his stuff started coming out really good after the Civil Rights Movement. So those 2 points in life,
After Uncle George died in 1999, she says the family continued to read his poems, and her grandfather's too, at reunions and church events, but the community as a whole began to lose touch with the poetry. That started to change in 2021. The town of Tazewell passed a Juneteenth resolution that called for honoring the contributions that African Americans had made to the town and the region. And now the Dickerson's poems are read aloud as part of the town's Juneteenth celebrations.
Everybody picking on me because I'm colored. They don't think I want to be free because I'm colored.
Betty Wallace read this poem by Uncle George at this year's Juneteenth.
They won't give me a decent job and claim that I just steal and rob. And they call me boy when my name is Bob, because I'm colored. I thought one time I'd try to pass, and then I looked in the looking glass. My hopes went down the drain real fast, because I'm colored.
Betty is 72 and says this poem, written by Uncle George in 1973, has special meaning for her.
I can relate to it so much coming up as a kid, that the things that we couldn't do, not only because I'm colored, but because I'm a dark-skinned colored person. Well, most of my life, people would say, oh, you dark-skinned and you can't do this, or, I did not learn that black was beautiful until black became beautiful. The color of my skin was a very important part of me.
She says she's known Uncle George's poetry for years. Now he's getting a new audience as well. Brooke Ann Creasy is 18 and starting to write poetry herself. She says while George Dickerson's poems are sometimes funny, they're also eye-opening.
When you hear poems from other perspectives of historical times, segregation and stuff, it makes you understand what we don't understand. Because I'm a white person, I don't get to experience that, and I don't get to experience the discrimination like black people do. And that's why I think a lot of people show arrogance, because they don't like to learn about other people's perspectives, because that's important, is empathy.
As for Jeanette Wilson, she says empathy and equality were recurring themes in her grandfather and her uncle's poems.
They both had the same idea. The idea to just have equality for rich, poor, black, white, everybody has a part in this world.
Portraits of the two George Dickersons are now part of a town mural of 16 noteworthy local African Americans. These two men are standing, in the words of one of Uncle George's poems, tall and proud, right next to the Tazewell County Courthouse. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Connie Kitts in Tazewell, Virginia.
That story and the one before it are part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in our region. You can find more Folkways stories at our website, wvpublic.org. We've highlighted several Black Appalachian poets today. One of the region's emerging voices is Torley Bush, who grew up in Webster Springs, West Virginia, but developed his work in part through poetry slams in Pittsburgh. Producer Bill Lynch spoke with Bush about his book, Requiem for a Redbird.
Would you like to read something?
Sure. I can read something from the book. There's also been a ton of new stuff that I've been working on, but I guess I'll start off with this one. And actually, I want to try to get through this without. Whereas Appalachia was always black, queer, and wild, a sax solo following the guitar riffs of a grunge duo rocking against the man at 123 Pleasant Street in Morgantown. Whereas Pittsburgh is our Paris, the Presbyterian Church in East Liberty, and Notre Dame across from Capri's Pizzeria, where I started doing poetry, the Abbey on Butler Street, and Apothecary, an alternative healing through hospitality and wine. Whereas the religiosity has a way of separating us. I was the only black person in my church growing up. I say was because I left it for Methodism, not because I left the faith altogether. Many of us are still in the process of toppling white Jesus, whereas I have to get away from the fire and the brimstone. So I run from Park Hole to Webster Springs and back every morning. Play basketball from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. every weekend of the summer with my rival of 16 years on the concrete courts of Baker's Island, whereas I return home to my grandmother's corn oil, salt, and pepper fried potatoes, throw some chicken in a skillet, have a feast, crash on the couch because my room is wall-mounted AC, got infested with yellow jackets one summer, and my grandpa had to kill them and seal it up, whereas I'm having another one of those wild dreams of outrunning the Flatwoods monster who swallows everything in his path towards the pink sun horizon, and my workhorse Chevy Impala that my granddad got in 2005 when I was 10 and hooked on the PlayStation 2, whereas I stopped at a Tudor's along the way. I figured I had the time. It was only the end of the world. I saw the Mothman chase his dinner down with raspberry moonshine, fly out the window at Mach 1, and beat the monster's green mall toothless for threatening them biscuits, whereas I stepped out of Tudor's and found myself back in Pittsburgh performing at City of Asylum, a haven for writers escaping political persecution abroad. What a hope to write in the face of injustice, whereas I remember going to Harper's Ferry for the first time, learning about Storer College and the Niagara movement, black men becoming educators and planting seeds for the NAACP. In West Virginia, be it therefore resolved, we have always been here, the church, the moonshine, the wild music playing us out into the night.
That was remarkable.
Thank you.
Just to say this so that my listeners understand this, you didn't read that. You did that off the top of your head, and the cadence, and there's so much in there. Wow. Do you do all your poems like that or just a couple?
So the way that I got started into poetry was I'd taken some creative writing workshops here at WVU. I think it was my junior year in my undergrad. And long story short, I wound up performing at Steel City Slam in Pittsburgh and got involved in that slam scene. And I met a guy there who was originally from Clarksburg named Joe Limer. He was mixed descent like me, but he was Filipino American. He graduated from WVU Law, was teaching out at San Marcos at Palomar College in California, but he would come back and go to the slam at Pittsburgh. He started mentoring me a bit and got me into these different drills on like how to work on your poetry and performing it like that. And that's where that sort of stemmed from. And then the other form and craft, like how that poem has that whereas structure, that sort of came from grad school work later on that I had at West Virginia Wesleyan.
Tell me about the poem itself. It seems very personal. I feel like you were describing your life in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So like the place that I had gotten the structure of that poem from it's the collection is called Whereas. It's by Layli Long Soldier, and throughout that collection, she makes use of the whereas and that resolution form. But I wanted to kind of play on it as a resolution that also does tell a story, and that's what I wanted to mix in, because I just have such a love for growing up here and like everything that I've experienced here. I don't know of the poems in this collection. This one actually might be my favorite one that I've written, partly because it gets into speaking into Appalachia as being such a complex place, and it talks about race and faith and everything else that I'm interested in, but it does do it through this lens of bringing someone in through a story. It's not, and this goes back to me talking about Joe earlier. Like one of the first things that he taught me was you're not wanting to like explicitly preach with your poetry. You're wanting to bring people in, you're wanting to let them in on your life and maybe shift their perspective that way. But there has to be a place for them as the reader to connect with you as a person.
Tell me about growing up in West Virginia.
I grew up in Webster Springs. Was raised by my grandparents on my father's side. I mean, I had good friends coming up through school. It was odd, and I didn't realize like some of these things until later. Like for a long time, like coming up through school, I was like the only black person in my grade. And like the way that I view race, I think is more of like, I think that there's a lot of bridges that can be built along the lines of class between people. I think that you have a history of that here in West Virginia in terms of like what the unions were able to do. Obviously met with all sorts of conflict from the powers that be, but that's been one thing that whenever I got into slam that like I kind of noticed was just sort of the different perspectives that I had about race from like growing up here. Apart from that, my own experience, I guess you'd say with racism, it's only ever been like verbal. Like I've never been physically attacked for my race, but I've had some just slurs and things of that nature come up, but been able to navigate it. And I think that's also part of like what I was trying to navigate in the book, and then like also taking it into the bigger context of like how it is across the country.
So what are your days like these days?
My day job is I'm working as a construction inspector. I guess I should mention that my undergrad from WVU is in mechanical engineering. There's a whole thing about going from that to doing both in terms of the engineering and the writing, but that's what my days mostly look like. I'm currently on a streetscape project, and it's a lot of just refurbishing of sidewalks, planting landscape, that sort of thing. I really do like to see all the people that are working as the contractors doing different jobs, because I mean, people will just often like drive by and not really see a lot of even though all the products come out to look to be like these really simple things, there's a lot of precision in terms of what they're having to do with like drawing strings, cutting boards. Like even though everything is simple, there's like this meditative, almost like a poetic art to what they're doing, even if it is messy.
What happens next for you as far as your poetry?
Yeah, I'm actually, I think, close to getting the first draft of a second collection done. Actually, if you give me a minute, this one is one that I'll have to pull up to read. But one of the poems I had actually just finished the other day was it was in response to a prompt, and I've been reading Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. It's a collection by Joy Harjo. She's U.S. Poet Laureate from the Muskogee Creek tribe. And this one was, I think this one was just good to read with the moment that we're in. The title of this one is Post-Election Prayer. Post-Election Prayer after Joy Harjo. That your hope remains as rooted as the Appalachian mountains that I call home. That your persistence is as steadfast as the Elk River, abiding even in drought and swelling with the good rains. That you know your gratitude is to your lost loved ones, their hymnal song piercing your political silos, your duty to your fellow human beings, clear as the reflection of dear eyes breaking the night. For though you cannot overcome every evil of the world, you can sing against its deafening roar. A meal, a donation to rebuild, a book to the inmate, a listening ear and kind word to the stranger, a voice to defend the immigrant and those persecuted. We, a chorus declaring to this madness, enough. That's one of the most recent pieces that I've gotten done.
Yeah, I can almost feel the ink still not drying on that one. That's amazing.
And that's another thing that I've been trying to do is like there's been a lot of stuff that I've had to, I guess, process over the course of this whole cycle as a writer and as a poet. And I'm trying to really maintain what I managed to strike with my first collection in terms of having a sense of balance of like knowing when and how to express a focus and a calling out of what is wrong and balancing that with the joy that you can still see in your life and the good around you, and like trying to strike a balance with that.
Requiem for a Redbird is available from Pulley Press, an imprint of Clyde Hill Publishing. Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Landau Eugene Murphy Jr., Carpenter Ants, Tim Bing, Bob Thompson, and Blue Dot Sessions. Bill Lynch is our producer. Abby Neff is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. We had help this week from Folkways editors Nicole Musgrave, Jennifer Gorin, and Clara Hazlett. You can find us on Instagram @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe to our newsletter and stream all our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, focusing on students' futures. Classes available at concord.edu/apply.